Chapter 13. Mission and Significance of Yahusha and His Apostles. Correction of the old concept of Yah and false traditions. Yahusha, the Hamashiach, has been the clearest teaching that I have given you in the world to show you how great is the love and wisdom of the Father. Yahusha was the living message that the Creator sent to the earth so that you would know the virtues of He who created you. Humanity saw in Yahusha an angry and implacable Elohim, a terrible and vengeful judge, and by means of Yahusha, He came to save you from your error. See in the Master the divine love made flesh. He came to judge your acts with His life of humility, sacrifice, and charity, and rather than punishing you with death, He offered His blood to help you to know the true life, that of love. The divine message illuminated the life of humanity, and the word that the divine master gave to men gave origin to the religions and sects through which you have sought me and continue to seek me. Yet truly I say, you have not yet understood the content of that message. Humanity has come to think that the love of Elohim for His children is infinite, since He, in Yahusha, died for the love of men. They have come to be moved by the suffering of Yahusha before His judges and executioners. They have come to see the Father in the Son, but the content, the reach of that which the Most High wished to say to humanity through the revelation that began with a virgin and concluded in the cloud of Bethany, has not been interpreted to this day. I have had to return in the same cloud in which the Word ascended to the Father to give you the explanation and show you the true content of all that was revealed to you in the birth, life, works, and death of Yahusha. The Spirit of truth promised by Hamashiach in that era is the divine manifestation that has come to illuminate the darkness and clarify the mysteries that the mind or heart of man have not been able to penetrate. I came in the second era as a man, preaching my truth by example. I stopped the useless sacrifice of innocent and unconscious beings, sacrificing myself on the altar for the sake of a perfect lesson of love. The Lamb of Elohim you called me because of that people having sacrificed me on their traditional day of celebration. Truly my blood was spilled to teach men the road of redemption. My divine love was poured forth from the cross upon the humanity of that and every time, so that in that example, in that word, and in that perfect life, humanity be inspired and find its salvation, purification from its sins, and the elevation of the Spirit. The example of Yahusha. It was necessary for Yahusha to show you the principles that you must follow and from which you had departed. I showed you all my meekness, my love, my wisdom, and my charity, and drained the cup of pain in front of you, so that your hearts would be moved and your understanding would be awoken. It was necessary that your hearts awaken to good, and that the pain of seeing me crucified for the love of them would act as a thorn that remind them that you must all suffer for love in order to come to the Father. My promise for all who wish to take up their cross and follow me was eternal peace, the supreme well-being that in the Spirit has no end. Hamashiach is and must be your model. It was for that reason that I came to make myself man in that time. What was the manifestation that Yahusha gave to humanity? His infinite love, His divine wisdom, His limitless mercy, and His power. I said to you, imitate me, and you will come to perform the same works I do. If I, as master, you must understand that it is not to teach you lessons that are impossible or out of reach of the understanding of men. Understand then that when you perform works like those Yahusha taught you, you will have reached the fullness of life about which I spoke to you before. The importance of the doctrine of Yahusha. No other people of the earth of any generation or race have found the doctrine of Yahusha given as an example, like an open book for humanity to study, nor anything like it. For those who have arisen giving precepts of justice or doctrines of charity have been sent by me to the earth as forerunners or as emissaries, but not as divinity. Only Hamashiach came among you as divinity. He came to give you the clearest and greatest lesson that the heart of man has ever received. The summoning, learning, and trials of the apostles of Yahusha. In this era you have commemorated the years of my preaching, those 3 years in which I prepared my disciples, in which I lived with them, and in which I live with them. They beheld all my works, and during the preparation succeeded in entering my heart and contemplating the purity, majesty, and wisdom present in the Master. In those days I performed no ostentatious acts. My passage through the earth was humble, but he who was prepared witnessed the grandeur of my presence and of the time that he lived. Thus I chose my disciples, some I found on the banks of the river, and called to, saying, Follow me. When they fixed their gaze upon me, they realized who it was that spoke to them, and so one by one I went on choosing. I never said, and I was preaching in the world, that my disciples were already teachers or that they would be heard. They were the pupils who, captivated by the light of my word, meekly followed me, but who, even so, made errors, for they needed time to transform themselves and thereafter arise as examples for humanity. They were stones who were being polished by the brush of divine love, so that later they too could convert rocks to diamonds. I have tested my disciples during all eras. How many times I submitted Peter to a test, and only once did he weaken. But do not misjudge him for that act, for when he kindled his faith, he was like a torch among mankind, preaching and giving testimony of the truth. Do not judge Thomas. Consider how many times you have witnessed my deeds, and even then you have doubted. Do not regard Judas Iscariot with contempt, that beloved disciple who sold his master for 30 pieces of silver, for there has never been a greater repentance than his. I availed myself of each one of them to give you lessons which would serve as an example, and which would exist forever in the memory of mankind. After their weakness, they had their repentance, a conversion and absolute devotion to their fulfillment of their mission. They were true apostles, and they left an example for all generations. John the Apostle. Remember when my body was pried from the cross and then interred, my disciples, dismayed and unable to comprehend what had happened, believed that with the death of the Master all had ended. It was necessary that their eyes see me again, and their ears again hear me, for their faith to be rekindled, and to reaffirm their knowledge of my word. Now I must tell you that among the disciples there was one who never doubted me, who never hesitated before the trials, and never abandoned me for an instant. It was John, the faithful, valiant, fervent, and most loving disciple. It was because of that love that I entrusted Mary to him at the foot of the cross, so that he could continue drinking from the love of that blameless heart, and at her side be strengthened yet more for the struggle that awaited him. While his brothers, the other disciples, fell one by one to the blows of the executioners, sealing the truth of what they preached in the name of their master with their blood and their lives, John overcame his death and escaped martyrdom. Condemned to exile, his persecutors did not know that there on the island where he had cast him, the great revelation of the times that you are living in, the prophecy that speaks to men of what will be and what must be fulfilled, would descend to him from heaven. After loving his brothers so much and dedicating his life to serving them in the name of his master, John had to live isolated from them, alone, but praying constantly for humanity, thinking always of those whom Yahusha had poured forth his blood. The prayer, the silence, the withdrawal, the purity of his existence, and the kindness of his thoughts performed the miracle that this one man and the spirit evolved in a brief time to a degree other spirits have needed thousands of years to be able to reach. When I took upon the dwellers of this world, I see that the people know my name, that millions pronounce my words, but nonetheless, and in spite of this, truly I say to you that I do not see the love of one another. When I look upon the dwellers of this world, I see that the people know my name, that millions pronounce my words, but nonetheless, and in spite of this, truly I say to you that I do not see the love of one another. All that I taught you in that time and all that happens in the world is the explanation and fulfillment of the revelation that through my apostle, John, I gave to humanity while my disciple inhabited the island of Patmos. I bore his spirit to the heights, to the divine plane, to the unfathomable, to show him the symbols, the beginning and the end, the Alpha and the Omega, and he saw that which is and which was and which is to come. He understood nothing at the moment, but my voice speaks to him, saying, "What you see, write," and he wrote. John had disciples who sought him in his retreat, crossing the sea in boats. Avidly those men asked he who had been the disciple of Yahusha, how the master had been, how were his words and miracles, and John, imitating his Elohim in love and wisdom, amazed them with his words. Even when he had arrived at old age and with his body weakened by time, he still had the strength to bear witness of his master and say to his disciples, "Love one another." Those who sought him out, seeing that the day of the departure of John approached, and wanting to have all the wisdom that this apostle possessed, begged him to reveal what he had learned from his master, and for an answer they only heard that phrase, "Love one another." Those who asked with such hope and interest felt disappointed and thought that age had erased from his memory the words of Hamashiach. I tell you that John had not forgotten a single one of my words, but that from all my lessons flowed that single essence that condenses all of the law, the love of one another. How could the lesson of the master he so loved be erased from this so much beloved disciple? After my departure in the second era, your celestial mother remained on earth to strengthen and to accompany the disciples. After their ordeals and sufferings, they found warmth in her gentleness and nourishment in her words. They continued to follow the divine path inspired by Mary, who represented the divine master and continued teaching them. Once she departed from earth, their struggle began, and each disciple took the path that was designated for him. The love of Mary will be very close to you during this third era. It will strengthen you and encourage you during your ordeals. The apostles Peter and Paul. Do not forget what happened to Peter, my disciple, whom Saul intended to murder. I proved to my faithful apostle that he was not alone in his ordeal, and that if he trusted in my power, I would defend him from those who wanted to persecute him. Saul was surprised by my divine light when he went searching to capture Peter. My light touched the deepest part of Saul's heart, and he knelt in my presence, conquered by my love and incapable of carrying out the mission that he intended against my apostle Peter. Instead, he felt the transformation of his entire being because of the great faith and love he felt for Hamashiach. He then quickly went looking for Peter, not to murder him, but to ask Peter about the teachings of Hamashiach and to let him become actively involved in the Most High's work. Since then, Saul became known as Paul. That change of name signified the complete spiritual transformation that had occurred in that man. Paul was not counted among my 12 apostles. He did not eat at my table, nor follow me along the roads to hear my teachings. Rather, he did not believe in me, nor see kindly those who followed me. In his heart existed the idea of exterminating the seed that I had confided to my disciples, which had already begun to spread. But Paul did not know that he himself was one of mine. He knew that the Messiah must come, and he believed in him, but could not imagine that the humble Yahusha was the promised Savior. His heart was full of the arrogance of the world, and that is why he had not felt the presence of the Most High. Saul had risen up against his Redeemer. He persecuted my disciples as well as those who approached them to hear my message from the lips of those apostles. Thus I surprised him, who was dedicated to the persecution of those who were mine. I touched him in the most sensitive part of his heart, and he recognized me at once, for his spirit had awaited me. It was for this reason that he heard my voice. It was my will that this public man be converted in this manner, so that the world continue witnessing at each step these surprising works that serve as stimulus to its faith and understanding. Why cite, deed from deed, the life of the man who from that moment consecrated his life to loving his fellow men, inspired by love for his master and for his divine lessons? Paul was one of the greatest of the apostles of my word. His testimony was always of love, purity, truth, and light. His prior materialism was transformed to a very elevated spirituality. His hardness became infinite tenderness, and thus was the persecutor of my apostles made into the most diligent sower of my word, the untiring traveler who carried to various nations, districts, and towns the divine message of his Elohim, for whom he lived and for whom he offered his life. Here, beloved people, you have a beautiful example of conversion and a demonstration that even without having heard me, men can come to be my great apostles. The example of the apostles. Who other than I inspired the disciples in the second era as they continued their journey on earth without the divine master? Do you not admire what each disciple was able to accomplish? I say to you that those disciples had weaknesses, as do all human beings, but later they developed great faith and love. They did not fear being left on earth as sheep among wolves, continually being persecuted and ridiculed by others. They had the power to perform miracles and knew how to use that gift to convert the truth. Blessed were those who heard what Yahusha had said through the lips of my apostles, because they presented my doctrine without any alteration in a true and pure form. That is why those men who heard my apostles speak felt in their spirit the presence of the Most High. They experienced a sensation of power, wisdom, and majesty. In them you have a worthy example. Those poor and humble fishermen from Galilee, transformed by love into spiritual fishermen, moved people and empires with the word they had learned from Yahusha. And with their perseverance and sacrifice, they prepared the conversion of the peoples and the establishment of spiritual peace. From kings to beggars, they knew my peace in those days of true Christianity. That era of spirituality was not lasting among men, but I, who know all, had already promised and proclaimed my return, for I knew that you would once again have need of me. The expansion of Christianity. My doctrine on the lips and in the works of my disciples was a sword of love and light that fought against ignorance, idolatry, and materialism. A clamor of indignation was raised by those who saw their myths and traditions would soon be toppled, while at the same time in other hearts a hymn of joy was raised before the illuminated path that opened to hope and faith for those thirsty for truth and oppressed by sin. Those that denied the spiritual life were exasperated on hearing the revelations of the kingdom of heaven, while those who had sensed its existence and who hoped for justice and salvation gave thanks to the Father for having sent his only Son to the world. The men who kept in their heart the blessed passion to love and serve their Elohim with purity saw their path open and their understanding illuminated upon penetrating my word, and felt relief in their spirits and hearts. The teachings of Hamashiach as the true spiritual bread came to fill the immense vacuum that they bore, fulfilling all the hopes of their spirits with its perfection and its essence. A new era began, and a clearer road leading to eternity opened. What beautiful sentiments of spiritual elevation, of love and tenderness awoke then in those who were illuminated by faith to receive my word. My courage and firmness accompanied those hearts that knew how to suffer and face up to all without weakening for an instant. Could it have been because the blood of the Master was still fresh? No, people. The spiritual essence of that blood, which was a spiritual representation of divine love, will never dry or vanish. It is present and is as alive and warm now as it was then. It is that in those hearts there was also love for the truth, that which they consecrated their lives and offered even their blood as confirmation that they had learned the lesson of their Master. That nobly spilled blood overcame the obstacles and difficulties. Oh, how the spirituality of the disciples of my word contrasted with the idolatry, the materialism, the selfishness, and the ignorance of the fanatics of the old traditions, or of the pagans who lived only to worship material pleasures. So good examples along the road do not adulterate my teachings. In this, imitate my disciples of the second era who never fell into material forms of worship to teach and explain my doctrine. The idolatry into which mankind later fell cannot be attributed to them. Their hands never erected altars, nor constructed palaces for spiritual worship, but bore the teaching of Hamashiach to humanity, brought health to the sick, hope and consolation to the poor and miserable, and like their master showed the road of salvation to the lost. The Christian religion that you know in these times is not even a reflection of the doctrine that my apostles practiced and taught. Once again, I tell you that in those disciples you can find the perfect models of humility, love, charity, and elevation. They sealed with their blood the truth that they pronounced with their lips. Humanity will no longer ask you for blood to believe in your testimony, but they will ask you for truth. My peace be with you.